Good morning, everybody. Are we on? Yes. Good morning. My name is Pape Gaye. I'm with IntraHealth International, your host. Thank you. Great. So we're going to shift the conversation, and a subject that is actually extremely important is picking up a little bit from Samir's point about implementation. That's where we tend to make all of our mistakes and so forth. But I wanted to actually help us look at how the landscape of international development has changed, how we have a lot of new actors, and how there is a lot of excitement about the private sector. And I think this excitement is motivated by the fact that we are seeing, unfortunately, we are seeing a decline in overseas development assistance. We are seeing a lot of countries saying, why should we be spending our money? And we are seeing a lot of push for domestic financing. The reason why we're excited about the private sector coming into this space is that when you look at the resources that could be available to support our work, there's actually no comparison. I think the amount that's available for assistance is so much smaller compared to what exists in the private sector. So I think it's important that we begin to pay a little bit more attention about what that means, because some of you are probably still questioning, maybe skeptical even, about what are the real motives of these private companies. Are they just interested in coming into the space, into development, just because they want to do good? Or do they really want to do this just to promote their markets? You remember, those of you who've been with this movement for a while, I think Chris Elias from the Gates Foundation has said that we're observing a blurring of the line between the nonprofit and the for-profit. So I think the train has left the station, and I think we need to find a way to embrace participations from all of the sectors. We have with us today two companies, representative of two companies who've been very active in this space. Johnson & Johnson and GE are both been doing a lot of work, and I think if you notice corporations and their involvement, you will see that these are companies that are really active in this space. So we wanted to take a few minutes to just have a short conversation about their vision, about their company, and why their company are interested in actually working in international development. Let me start with Asha and GE. What can you say on this subject of a company like GE coming into development?
Yeah, thank you, Pape, and really excited to be here. First of all, I want to take a step back and kind of take the cloud around when you think about a big conglomerate like GE and our role in this space. Just sitting here in this particular space, you probably wouldn't hear someone from the private sector to say, I quite feel comfortable because this is the new culture that even a company like GE is embracing. So if you think back, and this year actually we're celebrating our 125 years of GE, we really started as a startup with the invention of the light bulb. And Thomas Edison said, I did not fail 1,000 different ways, I just figured out 1,000 different ways the light bulb wouldn't work. So to all of the startups that are sitting here, when you think about big companies such as GE and J&J, we all started somewhere small, but we started now and started building on that ethos of failure is an option, and you keep innovating till you find the solution, and partnership on top of that is what got us to where we are. So I just want to put that out there as you're thinking about big private sector companies. It is a huge space, but at the same time, we're also thinking of it from, you're starting very small and then building your way up in the space. So I would just start there with where GE is, and it also reminds me of something that Milton Friedman once said, that the biggest responsibility for a corporation is to use its resources to make profit, as long as you're within the rules of the game without deception and fraud. I think the reality now that we're seeing in the development space is that the rules of the game, they're changing, where private sector is at the table. I wouldn't say that we weren't doing anything in the past. It's just that now with the SDGs, we're at the table and we also have a role to play in this space. But the reality is that what a corporation should be doing is making profit for the economic empowerment of the countries that we live and work and play. So with that said, also then making sure that you are a good corporate citizen in doing so. And this isn't just about putting money in the space, it's bringing your entire resources to be able to do good for the place where you live and work.
By the way, when you mentioned GE and the light bulb, the name SwitchPoint might be actually very appropriate, right? Michael, J&J actually has been very visible in this space, in the global health space, partly because of your focus on supporting nurses. Your ads about nurses and promoting nurses have been fantastic. And yourself and the work that you lead, I know because we are a very strong partner too, you've been doing a lot in this space. So what are some of your thoughts about opportunities and why, and what would your company gain from getting more involved?
Well, I like where Asha started with the startup, because I'm not going to miss the opportunity to say that J&J was a startup in 1886, a little older than GE, with the idea of antiseptic wound care. So the Band-Aid was an innovation at the time, and the whole, Joseph Lister, safe surgery, which we're all working on today. We began small, and we're big. Admittedly, we're big, and with big comes a huge responsibility. And I think I'm glad the goals are up behind us, because I think we cut our teeth a little bit on the Millennial Development Goals and learning what it means to be out in public and making commitments. And I think one of the big learnings for me was that who's keeping track of all these commitments, and who's keeping the big accountable. And so I think in entering the second year of the SDGs, I think you all as stakeholders need to be asking those questions. And I think we're not afraid to answer those questions, because in our group anyway, we talk a lot about how are we going to count these. We made these big commitments, and they're mostly REACH commitments, but we want to go beyond REACH and talk about what kind of impact that we've had. And what else are we? I know we wanted to talk about this a little later, and as a little teaser for the 145 Micro Lab, we want to have a conversation about what you think about this, and what it's big for good mean for you. And quite simply, I think it's an increased accountability. I mean, Asha and I both work in the CSR space, but we are not the leading light of the company. I mean, the people that are making the products, doing the research and design. I mean, we're working in tandem, but we're out there in this space with you, and often we're wondering how we communicate back to our businesses around things like the SDGs, because they can be quite abstract when you just start talking about these, and then you show somebody the list of indicators and their eyes go crossed. I mean, so I think just an increased visibility for us, our roles, how we integrate with the business, and how we're on the world stage, talking about things like goal setting, and long-term, like how are we going to get there?
So let me pick up on that. As you mentioned, both of you actually work in the corporate social responsibility department, and we know that in these large companies, that tend to be a very small part of the company. That was designed to have resources dedicated to helping companies, helping good, doing development and so forth. What are you doing to bring the rest of the company into the work that you're doing? Asha?
Yeah. I would say the future is definitely where the core of the company is and not CSR. What's the rest of the company? The rest of the company is actually already there. Now it's a matter of figuring out how, when we talk about public-private partnerships, it should, as stakeholders, both on that side and this side, we should be thinking about looking beyond corporate foundations and working with the company themselves without altering the mission for what we all stand for. And there's definitely opportunities there. So if I look at the future, it is about building the workforce of the future. It is about additive manufacturing, not in a developed country, but in a developing country. And how do we help advance that together without altering the mission? So that's how I would look at it from an SDG perspective. Because the reality is that we cannot accomplish this without the full force of the corporation coming together. And I go back to, this goes beyond funding, this goes beyond money. If I were to step away from a GE or a J&J for that matter and looking to build partnerships, to me it's about the brain power that the company brings. It's about the innovation, it's about the skills, it's about the know-how. I mean, you talk about large-scale manufacturing. I always draw parallels to something that we're working on in safe surgery. It requires a lot of different moving parts to come together. And if anyone's figured that out, it is these big manufacturing companies that are moving this well-oiled machines. So how do you learn from that? How do you bring unlike minds together? And how do we start building those partnerships? Because I often, to be completely honest with you, get tired of folks looking at the private sector, and again, private sector, big and small, just from a pure financial transaction perspective. So I do hope that and I think this change is absolutely happening. I know IntraHealth definitely has great partnerships with GE in really bringing our expertise to the table and then determining how the collective us can work for the bigger impact.
Yeah. Thank you. Michael?
Well, the traditional philanthropy, the corporate philanthropy is on the wane. I mean, it's being redefined in every company. I mean, the conversation started, 20 years ago. Michael Porter, Mark Kramer shared value. You can make a profit and do good at the same time. So this simple thought and formula has permeated companies like, well, why aren't we doing good and doing well? And so every company has taken, a big soul-searching exercise into what is the role of pure philanthropy, strategic philanthropy, what is the role of our employees, how do they get behind an SDG commitment? And believe it or not, I think one of the most exciting things I've seen is this group that's come together, Impact 2030. It's actually trying to measure the impact that employees are going to have on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I mean, that's a conversation that we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago. IBM has been out there progressively putting their employees in solving community problems. But I mean, it's a new age. Our group just went through a redefinition of whom we are, and it is about bringing all of J&J to bear. I mean, not just this small CSR group, but our employees, who have incredible skills, competencies, many Peace Corps. I did a survey. I was shocked to see, I think we have 50 Peace Corps vets in the ranks of J&J. I started inviting them to meetings. Help us think about this. How can we deploy you? How can, we're having big conversations with HR on how to develop you professionally and give back at the same time. Love the phrase, talent for good. And
that's good.
And so this is happening around, as I said, IBM, Microsoft, others have been doing it for a while. Pixara's here, I know. They're expert at this. But this is the future. And making a value statement for the group's work. I mean, we changed our name from Worldwide Contributions to Global Community Impact. I mean, that's huge. And what does that mean? So we have to have a value proposition to communicate to internal and external stakeholders where that $1 billion in philanthropy is being invested and spent, and what lives have been saved, what communities are better, what health systems have been strengthened, how many more community health workers have you enabled to be on the job? I mean, those are the questions and accountabilities that are part of the new reality.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing from you guys is that it's not just a question of writing a check and saying, here, you can go ahead and do something good. You are focusing on how can you help bring what the entire company has to offer, which I think would be great if we succeed at that, because I think one of the things the NGO community, or it's that part of it, because it is a business after all. We need to run it, we need to be accountable. As you're saying, we need to count, we need to. So I think if we can bring that expertise, it would be fantastic. Let me ask you a last question in that vein, is that when we look at the SDGs and how complex our world has become, and how we are all being called to get out of our silos, what are some of the ways we can do that? How can we promote more integration between global health and education, between education and food security, and at the same time pay attention to the environment? What can we learn from your organizations about doing that better? Because as you know, we are a little bit constrained as an NGO. We are funded to do very specific things, and oftentimes we struggle on this thing. Let me start with you, Michael, for that.
Well, that's a big question, and I'm not sure we're the model to do this. I think we have to do this together. I think, SwitchPoint is a great example of bringing people together to have conversation, because we're never together. I mean, there's no way we would all be together in a conversation. Some of you, yes, but it will force us to have, ask questions and to maybe break down some of the misperceptions that Asha was alluding to around what is big. And is it bad or good? And can it be good? And how can you help to make us better? And I'll cite the Frontline Health Workers Coalition. I mean, there are a couple companies that joined that, and the companies are much better citizens because of what we learn by working side by side with NGOs about what the reality is of health workers in many economies around the world. So it's not the answer, it's part of the answer, and we need to scale our ability to collaborate radically if we're going to reach those goals.
Yep.
And 2030 is right around the corner.
That's right. Asha?
Yeah. No, I concur with you, Michael. I think what the SDGs brought to light was it brought to light the conversation of public-private partnerships and breaking down silos. And it also brought the question of whether it's not anymore about whether the private sector has a role to play in development.
That's right.
It is how. It is how do we work together. And I don't think we have, all of us, us or some of the other sectors, we have it figured out yet. And I think it's definitely a learning process. I'll be the first to say it is learn as we go. But we have to start somewhere. And I think the beginnings of it have already started with some of the very creative public-private partnerships. So whether we start small, the reality is that we have to start now. And all of these, great programs that have scaled, it started somewhere with a couple of people coming together and building very innovative partnerships and programs. And I think that's how we ought to start in this space as well, is start small, but start now.
Well, this is fantastic, because knowing that our mission actually is changing very dramatically, we are not only focusing on just making people healthy, we want people who thrive. And I think we want people who thrive, who could be vibrant actors in the development space, who can help advance countries, who can help achieve economic growth. And I just wanted to thank you, thank both of you, and thanks your company for being very active and very upfront in this new reality that we're all working, and look forward to doing more. And by the way, just a little plug, I think at 1:45 you're going to have an opportunity to continue this conversation. So join me in thanking Asha and Michael. Thank you.